All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. That sentence was written more than 300 years ago, long before smartphones, long before social media, long before endless streams of content followed us everywhere we went. And yet, somehow, it feels more relevant today than ever. There is a moment that happens almost every day, a moment so ordinary that most people never think twice about it. You finish a task. You close your laptop. You put your phone down. You sit on the edge of your bed. You wait in your car before going inside. You stare out of a window for a few seconds. And suddenly, nothing is happening. No notifications, no conversations, no videos, no music, no demands. Just a brief moment of stillness. A brief moment alone with yourself. And then something begins to shift. Not around you, inside you. A small discomfort appears. Not anxiety, not sadness, not even a clear thought. Just a subtle feeling, a slight restlessness, a quiet urge to move, to check something, to do something, to reach for something. And before you fully notice it, your hand is already moving. A screen lights up, a feed appears, a video starts playing, a message gets checked, and the moment is gone. Most people never question this, because it feels normal. It feels harmless. It feels like modern life. But what if one of the most revealing things about a person is what they do in the moments when nothing is demanding their attention? Because the question isn't why you use your phone. The question is, why is it so difficult to remain in that empty space before you do? And what exactly are you escaping every time you leave it? Most people think distraction is a conscious decision, but if you observe yourself carefully, you may notice something unsettling. Many distractions happen before you even realize you've made a choice. Have you ever opened an app, closed it, and then opened the exact same app again 30 seconds later, even though nothing new could possibly have happened? Most people have. And what's strange is that they usually can't explain why. Not because they're hiding the answer, because there wasn't really a decision in the first place. The behavior happened first. The explanation arrived afterward. I'm just checking. I only have a minute. I'm taking a break. Maybe something new happened. The story comes after the action, not before it. And that's what makes the pattern so difficult to see. You don't experience it as avoidance, you experience it as normal life. More than a century ago, William James, the American philosopher and psychologist, often considered the father of modern psychology, wrote, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." In other words, your life is shaped by where your attention goes. And today, attention has become one of the most valuable resources in the world. Every platform wants it. Every notification competes for it. Every algorithm is designed to capture it. But after enough repetition, something changes. You stop directing your attention consciously. Your attention begins moving automatically toward stimulation, toward novelty, toward distraction. Notice how difficult it has become for many people to experience silence without immediately filling it. You're driving, a podcast starts. You're cooking, music starts playing. You're cleaning. A video plays in the background. You're trying to sleep. Something is still talking. None of these things are necessarily bad. That's not the point. The point is that silence rarely gets a chance to exist. And when it does, many people feel uncomfortable almost immediately. Imagine sitting alone in a room for 10 minutes. No phone, no music, no television, no conversation, no task, nothing to accomplish, nothing to consume, just yourself. For many people, that sounds surprisingly difficult, not because 10 minutes is a long time, because there is nowhere for attention to go except inward. And this is where the loop begins to reveal itself. Silence appears. Attention turns inward. A subtle discomfort emerges. Distraction follows. Relief arrives. Then the cycle repeats. Again and again and again. Eventually, the pattern becomes so familiar that it stops feeling like a habit. It starts feeling like reality itself. Like this is simply how people live. Like this is normal. But perhaps the most important question isn't why we distract ourselves. Perhaps the more interesting question is, what is the feeling that always arrives right before the distraction begins? Because whatever that feeling is, it seems powerful enough to make us leave ourselves over and over again. So what is the feeling that keeps pulling us back into distraction? The strange thing is, it usually isn't something dramatic. It isn't panic. It isn't grief. It isn't the kind of pain that immediately demands your attention. In fact, that's what makes it so difficult to notice. It often appears in moments of stillness, when the video ends, when the conversation is over, when the music stops, when there is nothing left to focus on except yourself. Nothing is wrong, yet something doesn't feel quite right. Not strong enough to call suffering, not clear enough to call fear, not painful enough to call sadness, and yet somehow uncomfortable. You may have felt it late at night. The day is over, the responsibilities are temporarily gone. The world becomes quiet. And for the first time all day, nothing is demanding your attention. You finally have the peace you thought you wanted, and yet something feels off. Your mind begins looking for something, a video, a message, a conversation, a podcast, anything. Not because you're interested, because you're restless. This creates a strange paradox. People often say they want peace, but when peace finally arrives, many immediately try to escape it. Why? Because what people often want is not peace. They want relief. And those are not the same thing. Relief means escaping pressure. Peace means remaining present when there is nothing distracting you. Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl noticed something similar in many of his patients. He described what he called the existential vacuum, a state where external demands disappear and people are suddenly confronted with an uncomfortable sense of emptiness. Not because life has no meaning, but because constant activity had been preventing them from noticing deeper questions beneath the surface. Who am I when I'm not busy? Who am I when nobody needs anything from me? Who am I when there is nothing to achieve? Most people don't consciously ask these questions, but silence often moves them closer to them, and that can feel unsettling. Because when stimulation disappears, your inner world becomes more visible. Thoughts you ignored all day begin returning. Unfinished emotions start resurfacing. Questions you've postponed quietly reappear. Work can hide these things. Entertainment can hide them. Productivity can hide them. Social interaction can hide them. But silence cannot. Silence removes the cover, and what was hidden suddenly becomes harder to avoid. Not because silence created it, because silence revealed it. This is why being alone can sometimes feel strangely exhausting. You're not doing anything difficult. You're simply no longer running, and the things you've been outrunning all day finally have a chance to catch up. At this point, it might sound purely emotional, but there is another layer to the story, a neurological one. Imagine a simple sequence. You feel discomfort. You reach for your phone. The discomfort decreases. Immediately, your brain learns something. That worked. Relief becomes the reward, and every reward strengthens the behavior that came before it. Over time, the sequence becomes automatic. Discomfort, distraction, relief. Repeat. Eventually, your brain no longer waits for conscious permission. It already knows the route. The moment discomfort appears, it begins moving toward relief, often before awareness fully catches up. This is one reason many distractions stop feeling pleasurable after a while. You're not necessarily seeking enjoyment, you're seeking relief. And relief is a powerful teacher. There is another piece of the puzzle, something discovered by neuroscientist Marcus Raichle, an American neurologist known for his pioneering work on the brain's default mode network. For a long time, scientists assumed the brain became relatively inactive when people weren't focused on a task. But they discovered something surprising. The brain doesn't shut down when nothing is happening. In many ways, it becomes more internally active. When external stimulation disappears, the mind begins generating its own content. Memories, imaginations, self-reflection, future scenarios, old conversations, unresolved emotions. In other words, silence is not empty. Silence is often crowded with the activity of your own mind. And if someone has spent years constantly consuming external stimulation, this internal activity can feel overwhelming. Not because anything is wrong, because it feels unfamiliar. The silence feels loud. Not because silence contains noise, but because it reveals thoughts that were already there. Thoughts that external stimulation had temporarily covered. And when those thoughts become uncomfortable, the brain reaches for the solution it has practiced thousands of times before. Distraction. Relief. Repeat. The longer the pattern continues, the less it feels like a habit, and the more it feels like part of who you are. But perhaps the real question isn't why your brain escapes. Perhaps the deeper question is, what exactly is it trying so hard not to see? At this point, it would be easy to assume that this is simply a problem of attention, a problem of habits, a problem of modern technology. But what if it goes deeper than that? What if the discomfort that appears in silence is not just something you feel, but something about who you think you are. Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, Carl Jung, believed that much of what we present to the world is not our complete self. It is what he called the persona, the social mask we develop in order to function in society. This mask is not fake, it is necessary. It helps us work, build relationships, navigate life. But there is a difference between using a mask and forgetting that you are wearing one. Think about how many roles you move through in a single day. Employee, friend, partner, parent, student, creator, listener, leader, follower. Each role asks for something slightly different, a different version of you, a different way of speaking, thinking, behaving. Over time, something subtle can happen. You become so occupied performing these roles that you rarely spend time with the person underneath them. Not because you are dishonest, because life is busy, and the performance never really stops. This is one reason silence can feel so strange. When the audience disappears, the performance has nowhere to go. No one needs anything from you. No one is watching. No role is required. No task is demanding your attention. And suddenly, a strange question begins to emerge, not verbally, emotionally. Who am I when none of those roles are active? Most people don't consciously ask that question, but they often feel its presence, especially in moments of stillness. Notice how many people feel uncomfortable during vacations. Not immediately. The first few days often feel wonderful. Freedom, relief, no deadlines, no responsibilities. But then, something unexpected begins to happen. Restlessness. A strange sense of aimlessness, an urge to become busy again. The external pressure disappeared, yet the discomfort remained. Why? Because activity was never just filling time, it was helping organize identity. For years, many people have answered the question, who am I, through movement, through productivity, through achievement, through stimulation, through reaction. And when all of that temporarily disappears, the answer becomes less obvious. Not because there is no self underneath, because the usual reference points are gone. The silence begins revealing something many people rarely encounter. Not emptiness, unfamiliarity. The unfamiliar experience of being with themselves without constantly becoming someone for everyone else. There is another reason silence feels uncomfortable, one that has less to do with identity and more to do with conflict. Most people think of themselves as one person, one mind, one unified decision maker. But everyday experience often tells a different story. Part of you wants one thing, part of you wants another, part of you wants to stay, part of you wants to leave, part of you wants truth, part of you wants comfort. Psychologist and Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman spent much of his career studying the different ways the mind processes information. And one of his most useful insights is surprisingly simple. Not every part of the mind moves at the same speed. Some are fast, automatic, reactive. Others are slower, reflective, observant. And nowhere is this difference easier to see than in moments of discomfort. Imagine sitting alone. No distractions, no stimulation, just silence. A subtle feeling begins to appear. Before you fully understand it, another impulse arrives. Check your phone, open YouTube, look at something, do anything. The reaction appears almost instantly. Observation arrives later. And this creates a fascinating internal conflict. There is a part of you capable of noticing the urge, a part that can observe, a part that can watch thoughts come and go, watch emotions arise, watch impulses emerge. But there is another part, a faster part, one that does not want observation. It wants relief immediately. Most of the time, this second system wins, not because it is stronger, because it is quicker. Have you ever caught yourself reaching for your phone before realizing you were bored? Have you ever opened an app and then suddenly wondered, why am I even here? That moment reveals something important. Awareness did not create the action. Awareness arrived after the action had already begun. And this is why so many behaviors feel automatic. Not because awareness is absent, because awareness is late. The impulse gets a head start. The habit gets a head start. The escape gets a head start. For years, this process repeats itself thousands of times, and eventually it becomes difficult to distinguish between what you consciously choose and what you automatically repeat. Silence exposes this conflict, because for a brief moment, both systems become visible, the observer and the escape artist. One stays, one leaves. One watches, one reacts. And most of our lives move so quickly that we never notice the struggle happening inside us. There is a moment that may be one of the most overlooked moments in modern life. A moment so brief that most people never notice it, not because it is hidden, because it happens too fast. It exists between discomfort and distraction, between impulse and action, between silence and escape. A small gap, a tiny space, barely a second long. The discomfort appears. The urge follows. Then the action happens. Usually so quickly that the entire sequence feels like one event, but it isn't. There is a gap in between. And in that gap, something unusual becomes possible. Observation. Not control, not mastery, not transformation. Simply observation. For years, many people have lived inside patterns they never truly saw. Not because the patterns were invisible, because they moved too quickly. The distraction always arrived before curiosity. The reaction always arrived before awareness. The escape always arrived before understanding. And so the cycle continued. Not because people were running from themselves on purpose, but because they rarely stopped long enough to notice they were running at all. Sometimes the deepest patterns in our lives remain hidden for a surprisingly simple reason. We never stay still long enough to watch them happen. Perhaps the strangest part of all this is that silence was never the real problem. For most of our lives, we assume the discomfort comes from being alone, from boredom, from having nothing to do, from a lack of stimulation. But maybe that is why the cycle keeps repeating, because we're looking in the wrong place. The discomfort doesn't begin when the room becomes quiet. The quiet simply makes it harder to ignore what was already there. The thoughts that never had time to finish, the emotions that kept getting postponed, the questions that stayed buried beneath schedules, responsibilities, and distractions. Silence doesn't create these things, it uncovers them. And perhaps that is what Blaise Pascal was pointing toward all those years ago. Not that sitting alone is difficult, but that sitting alone removes our favorite escape routes. For a few moments, there is nowhere else to go. No feed to scroll, no video to play, no conversation to disappear into, no task to hide behind. Only the experience of being with yourself. And for many people, that experience feels unfamiliar. Not because they've never been alone, but because they've rarely stopped moving long enough to listen. Carl Jung believed that much of what shapes our lives remains outside of our awareness. Parts of ourselves we ignore, parts we suppress, parts we never fully meet. And yet, those parts never disappear. They wait. Hidden beneath routines, hidden beneath productivity, hidden beneath endless stimulation. Waiting for a moment of silence. Waiting for a moment when nothing else is speaking. Because the value of silence was never that it makes you feel better. Its value is that it allows you to hear what constant noise keeps covering up. What you actually feel, what you actually want, what you have been avoiding, what has been quietly asking for your attention all along. The things we spend our lives searching for outside ourselves, clarity, direction, meaning, a sense of who we are, often become easier to hear when the noise finally stops. And maybe that is why sitting alone with yourself matters, not because silence completes you, but because it reconnects you to the parts of yourself that distraction keeps interrupting, to the thoughts that never get finished, to the emotions that never get felt, to the questions that never get asked. Perhaps the real tragedy is not that we spend so much time distracted. Perhaps the real tragedy is that the person beneath those distractions rarely gets a chance to speak. The person beneath the roles, beneath the habits, beneath the endless stream of stimulation. The person who has been quietly present through every stage of your life. And maybe that brings us back to the question at the center of this entire video. Why can't you sit alone with yourself? Maybe the answer isn't that you're afraid of silence. Maybe you're afraid of what silence might reveal. Because once the noise disappears, once the scrolling stops, once there is nothing left to consume, you may finally come face to face with parts of yourself that have been waiting a very long time to be heard. And perhaps that is what so many of us are really avoiding, not silence, but the possibility that beneath all the noise, there is something important waiting for our attention. The question is, if you stopped escaping for long enough to listen, what might you finally discover about yourself?